If there is a common denominator between the things I'll be talking about tonight, it's if there is a red thread, it's the issue of translation, whether it's problems of cultural translation between East Coast and West Coast in this case, or the act of inscribing one's subjectivity on an artwork, the act of interpreting an artwork from the situation you find yourself in, or how artists operate between different formal vocabularies and fields of knowledge. So in this sense, translation is crucial in terms of how we as beholders engage with artworks, but also how we relate the individual artwork to culture at large. The issue of translation is also dominant in this work. It's a work, an appropriation piece by a Lebanese artist called Tony Shakar, a martyr portrait. And it's a portrait of the artist's father as a martyr. Tony Shakar decided to pay a tribute to his father as a martyr. And the tradition is that the fighters of the Hamas militia in Lebanon are honored with martyr portraits, with martyr paintings, and so you have sort of painters who execute these, mass-produce these martyr paintings, and obviously they only do it with people of the Islamic belief. But Tony went to one of these martyr portrait painters and gave him the picture of his father and said, "My father died a martyr. I want a portrait of him." When he came, and of course this was risky business because obviously there are sort of conflicting religious interests here, but also it was for he was asking for a painting that would be a conceptual artwork. Stay in the realm of public work, but also to go back to the psychedelic or post-psychedelic discussion. This is a piece by Anne Lislegard, Dream Machine, and this is a prototype or a model of a piece she's realizing as a public artwork in Finland next year. And this concerns artistic translation of historical material, you could say, because Lislegard is realizing or appropriating Brian Geisen's Dream Machines, which will be familiar to some of you. Brian Geisen was a poet and an author who in 1958 invented this contraption, which is it's a flicker device. It's a perforated tube which is put onto a gramophone player, an LP record player with a light bulb inside. Then you're supposed to stare into it while it goes around, and that way you get a natural high. So you will have 5 of these huge dream machines on the coastline. You can see them here, where they will be placed. And this is interesting to me because it's so difficult to work with the psychedelic visuality of the 60s, because if there's something that's been co-opted and over-identified and commercialized since then it is the psychedelic style. So to translate the confrontation and the menace that was also a part of the psychedelic visuality in the 60s. I mean, we don't read that today when we see things like that. But I think here Anne might just put it off and translate this heritage into something else.
What would you say is the psychedelic visual?
Well, sort of, the sort of Austin Powers style of floppy letters and colors that mix. Oh, that's the cliche about the day glow colors, etc. But there's a lot more to it, of course. And if we follow that cliche, then every screensaver today is psychedelic, of course. But it was also more confrontational modes, like the flicker aesthetics, which was the strobe light as well, of course, which was anything else than pleasurable, I suppose, but an ecstatic device. So I think Dave complained to me that he was more of a European than an American artist by now, and because he shows a lot in Europe, or he shows more in Europe than in the States, and one can speculate if that's because there is a strong commercial system in the US, and that's practice, and Dave's practice isn't a commercial one. But then again, a commercial system, a strong commercial system, isn't a problem in itself, of course. It might be a problem when curators only go through the marketplace when they consider what artists to show. I think commercial galleries put artists on the map, and that's a very important function, obviously. But there are other artists out there whose practice cannot be easily calibrated to expectations and standards and spaces of the marketplace. So maybe this is not so much a question of the marketplace or the commercial system in itself, but more a question of the attitude of curators who may seek confirmation or authorization of an artistic signature in the commercial sphere. I think everything else is lazy curatorial research. This is another installation by Dave, 2007, was left to its own devices on reclamation, shown at Casco in Utrecht in Holland. And in other words, it's also a conceptual challenge, his work, and not that easily approachable. The two cities I mentioned, Utrecht and Slab City in California, Slab City is a sort of dropped out community in the Californian desert where war veterans and hippies live. And Dave has sort of been making a sort of comparative analysis between Utrecht, which is sort of an old, venerable Dutch trading city with lots of historical architecture, and then this dropped-out community in the desert in the middle of a no man's land. So he's been mapping sort of architectural functions between them and natural phenomena that correspond between them. This is also related to my current research. Is an installation view from an exhibition in Bordeaux in France from earlier this year called Exploration psychédélique en France. So psychedelic explorations in France, and it was a show that dealt with the psychedelic scene in France in the 60s and 70s. And there have been a few shows, a few exhibitions by now about the Summer of Love. There was one taking place at the Whitney a couple of years ago, I think, Summer of Love. It's a big curatorial conundrum and challenge how to stage this historical material, because it's so alluring visually again, and so tempting to just filter as the style that we know as this sort of screensaver aesthetics that we're familiar with. And again, the menace, the controversy of what it was in the 60s does often gets lost in the translation. They hadn't used original psychedelic work as promises of the psychedelic experience, which is always where it goes wrong, because how could you, any of us could have a psychedelic experience, I'm sure, but that doesn't address the work in its historical context. So they'd gone for a more radical approach, namely to only show documentation, and to also show the psychedelic aesthetics as the sort of the poor or pathetic visuality of the hand printed, hand out, or the homemade light show. So not just the spectacle